Tonight on Another Thing About Tartan, we welcome James Royan. James works for Police Scotland as Divisional Commander for Events and Resilience Planning across Scotland, but in his free time he is President of the Duns Summer Festival Committee. Although not originally from Duns, James is never shy to get involved in the town's events. Tonight we are really looking forward to hearing his story. For our viewers who aren't aware of Duns, it is a small market town in the Scottish borders, only a 10-minute drive from the ScotlandShop HQ. Each year the town commemorates their history and traditions with Reivers Week. The celebrations go all the way back to 1949, but are based on traditions from a lot further back than that, and is a chance for everyone in the town to get involved. James has been president of the committee since 2019, and we are so excited to hear everything that he gets up to in his role. So thank you for joining me tonight, James.
Pleasure.
It's really good to have you here. So why don't we start with you giving our viewers who might not know a little rundown of what the Duns Summer Festival Committee is and what Reivers Week is.
Yeah, certainly, and thanks very much for the invitation to come along. The Summer Festival within Duns is absolutely the highlight of the social calendar. It would be fair to say it's an opportunity for everybody within Duns to come together and really enjoy all of the activities, and there's activities there for everyone regardless of your age and stage in life. It's founded upon a set of traditions which, well, I'm sure we'll maybe speak about, but there are three really important people involved in those traditions. Firstly, the Reiver, a young man from the town of Duns, the Reivers lass, similarly a young lady, and the Winsome Maid of Duns, and that's a young girl that's chosen from the primary 7-year group at the local primary school. And those individuals are the leaders, the ambassadors of the town. They lead the celebrations over the course of the week, and they represent the town at all the other common ridings across the Scottish borders and beyond in actual fact. Reivers Week itself has got, as I say, many activities ranging from tea dances to teddy bears, picnics, sporting events, the traditional handball on the Friday night where the married men and the unmarried men compete in the town square with a small leather ball trying to score goals in either corner of the square. And the central piece of it, of course, is the mounted cavalcades that travel through the towns. They visit nearby villages and they travel and inspect the marches of the town right around the local area. So a great event, lots of fun, lots of laughter, lots of singing, of course, which is very important, but a real sense of tradition behind it as well.
Yeah, so much going on, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So being from Duns myself, I have grown up getting involved in the Reivers Week celebrations, and I find the history behind the festival so interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about the traditional aspects of Reivers Week? What does the flag stand for, and why do we have a Reiver? Yeah,
certainly. The Reiver and the Reivers lass, as I said, are the town principals for the year, and they're elected and chosen into that role. And really, the traditions of the Reiver and the Reivers lass go way back to the 13th and then the 15th century, where wealth was really measured in Scotland by the amount of land that you owned and the amount of livestock that you owned, and it was vitally important that those landowners protected their land and their livestock, and they would choose young men generally and groups of young men to go out on horseback and inspect their boundaries or inspect their marches. It was those young men that started off really the traditions, I suppose, of the common ridings and the riding of the marches as it has become known. And of course, it was really important for those groups of young men to be able to be recognised by other people who might see them coming, and other landowners. So they always carried a standard, they carried a flag to identify themselves, and it always had the emblem of the person that they were representing. A lot of people think that the squabbles that went on in the borders was very much Scotland and England and a cross-border kind of feud, but quite often it was a bit more than that. It was between families as well, and between landowners. So they each had a flag, they each had a standard that would represent who they were inspecting the marches on behalf. So that's really where the standard, the flag, came from, and now of course the Reiver carries the borough standard, the standard of the town of Duns and the local area, to show everybody else that they're representing their town.
Yeah.
So yeah, and a nice little tradition that continues even to this day is back in the 15th century, the sweetheart of the man that was sent out to inspect the marches would always tie a little ribbon on the top of the standard to wish them safe out and safe in, and we continue with that today, where the Reivers lass ties the colours of that year in ribbons to the top of the standard, otherwise known as bussing the colours. So a lot of tradition there.
Yeah.
And the Winsome Maid o' Duns, as I mentioned as well, is the other very important principle, and her history actually goes back to witchcraft, believe it or not, where in a couple of centuries ago, of course, in Scotland and elsewhere in the world, young ladies who were suspected of witchcraft were sadly burnt at the stake for that, and that happened in and around the town of Duns. It happened on a little bit of land called the Witches Now up on Duns Castle Estate, and often the townsfolk would go up and watch, and sometimes the townsfolk were given the opportunity to rescue one of the young ladies, and they would take them under their care, take them back down into the town itself, and that young lady would become known as the Winsome Maid o' Duns. And now those primary 7 girls who are treated like royalty, it's fair to say, with a big crowning ceremony in front of Duns Castle, splendid backdrop for that, they reflect some of those traditions as well.
Oh, that's so cool, I didn't know that. I also didn't know about the colour bus, and I didn't realise that's where it came from as well.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of other historical references throughout the week, there's no doubt about that, and one that I find quite interesting and quite an important point in history, I suppose, is on the Tuesday night we ride to the top of Duns Law, a law being a small hill, of course, and there's a small ceremony there, and it's to commemorate when Charles I of England decided to march up to the Scottish border to try and impose his version of Christianity on the Scots, and of course the Scots weren't very happy about that. And they formed an army based on a covenant that was signed, and that army became known as the Covenanters under the charge of General Leslie, and in 1639 he rode to the top of Duns Law, and he could see Charles I's army down about a couple of miles outside Berwick upon Tweed. There was a lot of envoys went back and forth and a lot of posturing, and fortunately not an awful lot of bloodshed. An agreement was reached, and off Charles I marched back southward, and it's often said that Scotland's right to its religious independence wasn't based on canon law, it wasn't based on civil law, it was founded upon Duns Law. So there you go.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's cool, that's a good story. So each of the different border towns, as you said before, they all host their own festival weeks and common ridings. But what makes Duns and Reivers Week so different from the other towns' celebrations? Yeah,
well, I think we're really lucky in Duns in that it's a relatively small community within the Scottish borders, and everybody really comes together for the celebrations. And as I've already said, there are lots and lots of different celebrations, a great variety in the types of things that people can become involved in, because not everybody rides horses and not everybody's interested in horses, but there's always something else to fall back on and something for you to do. And I think we're really lucky in Duns in that we have a really keen, enthusiastic, vibrant committee who are really creative and think about lots of different activities that can be undertaken. And even last year, in some of the difficult times that we've had in the last year, they came up with a new celebration, a scarecrow competition for the town, and that really was something that everybody bought into. And I think I'm right in saying we had something like 90 scarecrows throughout the town. So it was a great celebration. But I suppose equally so, Dun's a bit different in that it's a reasonably modern summer festival. Many of the other summer festivals, certainly the traditional common ridings, date well back, whereas our traditions are a little bit more modern in that every town in Scotland in the early part of the 1900s had a week called Infirmary Week, which was there to raise money for the local hospitals. In 1948, of course, the NHS, National Health Service, was put into place, and there was no longer a need for an Infirmary Week. So the townspeople of Duns decided that they would like to honour many of their traditions and perhaps replicate some of the traditional common ridings found elsewhere around the Scottish borders, and Infirmary Week became known as Reivers Week, and the town principals were elected. And in actual fact, that very first year, 1949, the first Reiver was a man called David Young, and David Young is still alive to this day.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah. So how did you first become involved with the Dunnes Summer Festival Committee?
Well, it was back in 2000, early 2019, I was approached and asked if I would be interested in becoming involved, and asked if I was interested in becoming president of the Summer Festival Committee. And to be perfectly honest, I was rather taken aback and surprised at having been asked to undertake such an important job within the town, but at the same time I felt it was a great honour and a privilege to be asked to do so. So after a bit of deliberation as to whether I should or I shouldn't do it, I committed to it and have thoroughly enjoyed it ever since. And indeed that first year in office in 2019 was just tremendous, but equally so important to reflect on many of the other people that have done the job before me and have made a fantastic job of it. So I was under no illusions as to how difficult the job and what a big act I had to follow, particularly the last president, Doug Redpath, who certainly made the role his own. So a lot of pressure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So had you been involved in the committee before you were president, or not really?
Not really involved in the committee, certainly involved in Reivers Week itself. Really fortunate that my wife's family are really heavily involved in Reivers Week. My father-in-law is an ex-Reiver and an ex-chief marshal, and many of my wife's aunties and cousins and other relatives have all been town principals or involved in it. And indeed, Vicky, my wife, was the Winsome Maid back in 1985, so a lot of tradition there. So really heavily involved in enjoying the festival and the celebrations over the years, but not specifically involved in the committee itself, but find it thoroughly rewarding to be part of.
Yeah, and so exciting to be asked as well. It's really nice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your role as president? Do you have any highlights from your time?
Yeah, no, I mean lots and lots of highlights to be honest. I think you know, that the opportunity to visit the other border towns and see their common ridings and be the hospitality that they show you and the various different elements to their festivals is really interesting and really enjoyable. But equally so, it's a real highlight just to be able to share even just a little bit of the excitement that the Reiver and the Reivers lass enjoy throughout the week by accompanying them to many of the events throughout the week, whether that be visits to nurseries or to the primary school or to some of the homes and the hospitals in the town. You know, really enjoyable. But I think really, to be perfectly honest, the greatest highlight was in fact just being asked to do the job and the privilege that comes along with that. Yeah,
that is, definitely. So I can imagine it has been really difficult this past year for the committee, just with all the different restrictions and everything. So how have you had to adapt the festival to fit with the restrictions?
Yeah, you're right. It's been a very difficult year, not just for Dun Summer Festival, but it's been a really difficult year for everybody, and sadly a very hard year, I'm sure, for many families across Scotland. But we were pretty determined that although we couldn't celebrate Reivers Week in the traditional sense, we wanted to mark the occasion as best we possibly could. So we decided to launch a virtual Reivers Week, and we did an awful lot of the more traditional activities through the power of social media. and we marked the ceremony on the top of the Duns Law, the ceremony at the War Memorial, the ceremony at the Bruntons Memorial on Duns Castle Estate. We managed to achieve all of that within the restrictions, of course, and we shared that through social media. And actually the feedback has been quite astonishing through that, because what it's allowed to happen is that people who are maybe from the area or from Duns that haven't been here for a while and remember the excitement and the traditions around Reivers Week, it allowed them to share in many of those moments as well, and see the surrounding landscape and the areas. And we have had thousands and thousands and thousands of views of all of those videos on social media. And equally so, the committee themselves came up with some new and ingenious ways of celebrating the summer festival as well. And you know, I've mentioned one of those already, the scarecrow competition, a virtual handball.
I was going to say that was my favourite one.
I mean, just fantastic, but just a reflection on the hard work and the creativity of the committee. But you know, we were really hopeful that perhaps it would have been a one-off, but of course this year we will stick to our virtualised in the main format, just to ensure that we do our bit as an organisation to overcome the worldwide pandemic that we're in, and then hopefully in 2022 we'll be able to return to our more traditional roots.
Yeah, be back better than ever.
Absolutely, we're hoping, yeah.
So you're originally from Elgin. What was it like for you moving down to the borders and witnessing Reivers Week with fresh eyes? Is there quite a difference in the traditions between the two places? Yeah,
there are many differences in the traditions, I suppose, but there are equally many similarities. So I can still remember vividly my first visit to Duns for Reivers Week. It was the Saturday of Reivers Week. I'd come down to visit. It was 1994, and I can still remember standing up on Windshield Moor, watching the mounted cavalcade galloping past and being absolutely mesmerised by this couple of hundred horses and riding past me. And I turned round to the young lady that was standing next to me, who is now my wife, I'm pleased to say, and said to Vicky, I'm going to do that next year. I'm going to participate in that next year. And I realised probably fairly quickly that was quite a naive statement to make, having never ridden a horse before, maybe bar a little Shetland pony on a little pony trek. But nevertheless, I committed to it. I had a couple of riding lessons. I hacked out on my father-in-law's horse, Ben, a few times, and sure enough, the next year on the Saturday morning, I mounted a horse, and I proudly followed the Reiver and Reiver's Last, John Bryce and Denise Burns, as she was at that time, with the Reiver and Reiver's Last, and proudly followed them out of the town. And as we got closer to the first field and the first gallop, I think it was probably a combination of fear and enthusiasm that was keeping me going. But nevertheless, after that, I was absolutely captivated and have remained captivated by Reivers Week and the traditions around it ever since. But there are similar traditions up in the northeast of Scotland. The incorporation of trades in many of the towns in the northeast still inspect the marches, as I've explained, happens down here, to protect their right to trade in that borough. I'm not sure that many of them ride the horse anymore. I think they lead the horse round the marches now, but a similar tradition nonetheless. So, you know, some similarities and some differences, but a lot of history, a lot of traditional Scottish history around Elgin, and indeed my mother was a music teacher, so the musical elements and the singing part of Reivers Week really interested me. Yeah.
So when you aren't busy with your presidential duties, you look after your own flock of sheep. So how do you fit it all in, and do you get the family to pitch in and help out?
Yeah, certainly the family do pitch in an awful lot to help out, sometimes willingly and maybe sometimes not so willingly. But yeah, it is a real team effort, and something that I have had an interest in since I was a young boy. My family background is a butcher shop, the meat business, and I've always had a really strong interest in livestock and either rearing livestock or showing livestock.
Yeah.
So when we moved down to the borders, we're really keen to just continue that interest.
Yeah.
And I proudly breed some traditional Dorset sheep and show them at many shows around the country. So it's just a passion, a boyhood passion, I suppose,
Yeah.
that's continued into adulthood. But
Yeah.
sometimes can be a bit tricky fitting everything in, but I think we get there in the end.
Yeah, I can imagine it's quite a time-consuming hobby, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, moving on to your Scottish heritage, you don't have a very traditional Scottish name. Have you ever done any research into your family tree? Are you linked to a Scottish clan, do you know?
Yeah, well, you're right, it's certainly not a Scottish name. So the family name Royan has its roots in the town of Royan, which is on the west coast of France.
Yeah.
And having visited there a number of years ago now, a lovely spot, coastal town. How then the Royans from the west coast of France got to the northeast of Scotland is a little bit unclear at the moment. However, there is a Benedictine abbey in Morayshire, and some of the monks from there maybe did have French roots. I'm not sure, but that might be one explanation. But really not sure. Maybe a coincidence of the old alliance between Scotland and France, perhaps. And on the other side of my family, on my mother's side, my grandfather emigrated at the time. Everybody from Scotland was emigrating from Scotland to Canada. He decided to come the other way, and he came to Scotland. So I've got a lot of family background in New Brunswick, again on the east coast of Canada. But in terms of links to clans themselves, there are tenuous links to the Dingwall clan, the Fraser clan, in my family background, but we still haven't quite worked out where the name Royan comes from in amongst all of that.
I did try to have a look for you, but I couldn't see any connections to any clans, unfortunately.
No, absolutely. But certainly a proud Scotsman nonetheless.
Yes, exactly. It doesn't determine it, so it's okay.
That's right.
So, did you celebrate your Scottish heritage growing up, and if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, as I say, a proud Scotsman, and I've always had a real interest in Scottish history, and sort of key pivotal events that happen. And I suppose growing up, there are sort of three broad pillars to that in many respects. First and foremost, as I think I mentioned, my mum was a music teacher. She taught music in all of the primary schools in the local town. And she probably instilled a real interest in me in music, albeit probably an untapped interest in many respects, but an interest particularly in traditional Scottish music. My mum has two sisters. My aunties played the violin, the fiddle, and the accordion, and my mum played the piano, and I've got a lot of fond memories of listening to that trio playing traditional Scottish music. So certainly a musical interest in my Scottish roots. Second to that is a real sort of pivotal moment in the history of Elgin, which was back in 1390, when the Wolf of Badenoch, he marched with his army upon Elgin and set the cathedral on fire and burnt it nearly to the ground. So the Wolf of Badenoch was Alexander Stewart. He was the illegitimate son of Robert II of Scotland, and he lived in a castle on an island in the middle of a small loch in Badenoch called Loch and Dorb. He banished his then wife who was the Countess of Cromarty, I think.
Right.
Banished his then wife back to her homelands, and took a mistress to himself. And the church, of course, wasn't very happy at that. And the Bishop of Moray, Bishop Burr, he decided that he was going to excommunicate the wolf Alexander Stewart from the church.
Right.
And in revenge for that excommunication, he marched via Pluscarden Abbey, which he equally burnt to the ground, and marched on Elgin and put the clergyman to the sword and burnt the cathedral to the ground, giving its now commonly held name as the Lantern of the North. But a real shame, because the ruins of Elgin Cathedral remain there, and it would have undoubtedly been a grand structure, to say the least.
Yeah.
But now, of course, just stands there as a ruin. So yeah, and then final part growing up was my interest in Burns, Robert Burns.
Yeah.
And of course Robert Burns, in his tour of the Highlands, visited Elgin, and that occasion has recently been marked by a group up there involved with Elgin Burns Club,
Right.
who did a bit of a tribute to Robert Burns's visit. But interestingly, when he arrived in Elgin, he commented that he'd never seen such a grand structure as Elgin Cathedral, albeit it was ruined at the time.
Yeah.
But he still didn't think it was as beautiful as the Abbey at Melrose. So there's a
Oh.
connection between
Oh,
Elgin
that's
and the
cool.
Bog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And finally, we ask everyone this question: what is your favourite tartan?
Yeah, well, I think I'm probably a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to tartan, and I like greens and blues within the tartans. So my personal favourite is a traditional gun. I do like the ancient gun as well, but the traditional gun for me is probably my favourite tartan. And as a young lad, as a 21-year-old lad, my mother and father bought me a handmade kilt in the gun tartan for my 21st birthday. So,
Oh, that's nice.
but the one thing I've come to realise, of course, is that my waistline has expanded considerably since my 21st birthday, so I might need to come to ScotlandShop for a replacement at some point.
For a new one in
Yeah.
a different tartan. Maybe.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
get the Duns Pipe Band tartan?
Yeah, I could do. Yeah, I could do. And I've well remembered, I did forget to mention that the Reivers Week is well supported by Duns Pipe Band, and they do a fantastic job. And for a town the size of Duns to have such a big band of both pipers and drummers is just tremendous.
Yeah, it is a good band.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights and stories into Reivers Week. It has been really interesting. I wish you a safe next few months, and I look forward to seeing what you and the committee get up to in 2021.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.